I'm going to start today by talking about a thing called Incident Command Systems for Cultural Institutions. Now, this is kind of as I kind of warned beforehand, this can be a very, very dense subject. So I'm pretty much just going to be focused on an overview today. And you're going to hear, as a heads up, a lot of repetition, just because a lot of these terms are used over and over again. So if you guys just bear with me, we'll go ahead and see about getting started. So Incident Command System. So what exactly is it? It's a standardized management tool meeting the demands of small or large emergency or non-emergency management across the country. So what are some of the benefits of ICS? ICS is basically standardized for everyone. We'll learn to operate within the same structure, one that will take over for all others. Everyone will be speaking the same language as well. That's one incredibly important thing about ICS. It's scalable. It applies to incidents large and small. It can be used on scene. It's management that takes place on the scene and not from some remote location. Now again, that's an incredibly important little point right there. Oftentimes when people are doing emergency management and emergency management issues, they will have somewhere where it's a remote location dealing with the emergency. You don't want that. You want someone on the scene to be able to see what's happening, and as things change and as things kind of morph, they'll be able to handle it. Another good thing about ICS is that it's multi-jurisdictional. Again, we stress that this can work across groups who may have different managers. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But because it works across organizational groups and organizational types, it's really useful for everyone. It's cost effective. It minimizes duplication of effort. The application is as effective for all types of hazards. So you'll see ICS actually used for hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, all different types. It can even be used, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, for special events that happen on your facility. You'll see the incident command structure used. So that's also a very useful thing. And it can be implemented in response or in advance. So it can be used for something that you know is going to be happening, kind of like that special events example I just spoke about, or through an emergency that's happening at the time. Okay, so again, what this presentation isn't. It is not for training in ICS. There are many different levels of ICS training, and all can be time intensive. Online classes can range from 1 hour to 4 hours, while in-person classes can take anywhere from a day to multiple days. I took part in probably about 4 or 5 years ago in a 2-day-long training on ICS, and by the end of it, I was pretty worn out. But it really gave you a good idea of what ICS is. But the other nice thing is that the online training is all free. So I'll be giving some webinars and some web addresses later in this presentation that will actually show you where you can go get ICS training. What this presentation is, kind of like what I said before, it's an overview of terms you will hear, and the goal is to give all participants a taste of what this system is. As we proceed through the presentation, you might start to recognize organizational terms and concepts that you've seen in other places. It's kind of proof of how this program has been adopted across fields. Okay, so why do we need to know it? Reason number 1. During a widespread natural or man-made disaster, this is what government, state, and local responders will be using. It's good to speak their language. Even if you end up not adopting this system during a disaster response, if you have folks set up on your location and they are going to start talking about disaster response and all that, they're going to be throwing these terms around, and it's good to have familiarization with the terms. That way, if you need something, you can go get it, or you will know who to go get it from. So it's nice to know the terms. And as I said before, reason number 2, for an in-house disaster, knowledge of this system can help you respond quickly and efficiently and can increase chances of saving your collections. Again, I'm going to go back to this. Lots of repetition, like I said. So what is it? We've talked about it a lot. It's essentially a command structure used to respond to an incident. That's all that ICS is. An incident equals a disaster. So it's a way to go about mitigating and handling a disaster situation. This crazy looking thing is the basic ICS structure. Slightly overwhelming, but by looking at pieces of it, it'll make more sense. In fact, you might start recognizing concepts from ICS from other sections of these webinars. So let's start at the top with Incident Commander and work on down. And I'm going to stop a second and just say that with this structure, what it really looks like is an organizational chart. When it boils down to it, that's what it is. So the top person is your incident commander. It's the ultimate person in charge. It's the person who provides overall leadership of the response. It's usually the first person to respond to an incident who has knowledge of the facility, and will be the only person in charge until an official transfer of command happens. So that's it. Incident commander is the first one there. Now, it's important that fact where they talk about it's usually the first person to respond, that you'll want to be the first person to respond who has knowledge of the institution and knowledge of the area. We kind of mentioned volunteers before. The thing with the volunteers is, like, let's say a once-in-a-while volunteer would happen to arrive at your location, they most likely wouldn't be the incident commander. You're going to be looking for a full-time staff who's knowledgeable in that position. That's going to be your incident commander. And that person is going to continue being the person in charge until there's been an official transfer of command, because you want that. You want that official transfer of command to happen before stuff kind of moves on to the next step. Additional key points for the incident commander: there's a chain of command. Every person takes orders only from their supervisor. There's a unity of command where every person only has one supervisor. But this shouldn't stop the communication. And I'm going to step back a little bit and say, okay, so for chain of command, you only ever want one supervisor, right? This is true of, like, the world. You only want to report to one person. And then only other person you report to, and that's it. But even with that, everyone has the right to ask questions about what is happening, and supervisors can only give commands to their assigned staff, and all staff only has, again, the one guy that's in charge of. That's important when it comes to incident commander. So the next level for ICS is this thing called command staff. They're basically support positions that help the incident commander with big picture issues. You don't always see them for all ICS situations. You end up seeing them mainly for larger situations, and they're there to support the incident commander on their day-to-day operations. So in this case, it looks like there's a public information officer, the safety officer, and a liaison officer. Many times, these roles will just be done by the incident commander, and that's usually what happens is if the position is not filled, the duties are going to be done by the next higher position. So public information officer, for those of you who don't know, is usually the person who goes out and speaks to the press. Right? They're the ones to go and say, there's been a disaster. We need to handle it. This is how we're handling it. If you don't have someone within the command structure to do it, then the incident commander will just take over that role. The next level for ICS, and this is the true guts when it comes to the scheme of ICS, are these four sections. These are the primary responsibilities for incident management. You'll see operations, planning, logistics, finance, and admin. Again, all the staff in charge of these areas, known as chiefs, report directly to the incident commander. If any position is not filled by the chiefs, the incident commander will take over all duties. Again, this is a perfect world, right? You got these four silos of operation happening within an incident command. For the operations sections, the first section is usually staff during an incident. Directs all strategic and tactical actions required to meet the incident. Basically, they're going to be the main section dealing with the actual response. The person in charge of this group is sometimes the commander themselves, or can basically be considered second in command. So that's going to be the big one. It's operations. So you think about it, it's going to be the continuity of operations. It's going to be the people trying to keep things going throughout the actual disaster. Next up is going to be the planning section. This section is created to understand the situation as it stands in any moment, predict the probable course of incident events, and prepare alternative strategies. I like to think of the planning section as the what-if section. They're basically looking to see if stuff changes. They're coming up with alternate strategies all the time. They can also be extremely important as incidents evolve over response. Hurricanes speed up, supplies don't show up, any of those things happening, the planning folks are going to be the ones sitting there being able to handle that situation. For larger incidents, you'll see the next silo, which is called the logistics section. It's used in larger incidents, and it's responsible for communications, medical support for the staff, food for the staff, supplies, facilities, and ground support. Often, you really only see usually a separate logistics section if it's a large incident. Most times this is taken over by operations, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Operations handles the day-to-day in and out. This would be underneath them, the long thing. Now this next section is called the finance administration section. They're basically there to ensure that everything is paid for. They are incredibly important. They fulfill the rules like timekeeping, they're completing proper paperwork to record time, procurement, executing all contracts and ordering all equipment and supplies. compensation, following up on any claims filled by a governing agency, cost analysis and containment, recommending ways to reduce costs whenever appropriate. So again, these are going to be your paper pushers, basically, but you might recognize this concept from the Getty publication. They include this group called the document group. But the thing that's most important to me is the fact that these are the folks that complete all the paperwork that you will probably then submit to FEMA for reimbursement. So keep that in mind. We like our finance and administrative section. We want to keep their lives easy. So they're an important group to set up. Okay, so we went through those. There's your 4 silos. We got all the rest of this stuff down at the bottom. So what is all of this? Basically, it's just a continued organizational structure with terminology used by ICS to explain how staff is organized to deal with the incident. You're going to see many terms kind of repeated over and over again, but basically what they are is that the biggest thing that you can have is a thing called a branch, which is responsible for major functions below the sections. They're often organized by functional or geographical area. So if you see branch, you know that it's going to be a larger group, and it's done by geographic area, functionality, something along that line. If you see something named a branch. For a division, they're going to be responsible for operations within one geographic area, so that's division. And then a group divides incidents into functional areas of operation. So the groups are often allocated between the branches and resources in the operations section. As we kind of keep going down our organizational chart, you next have a unit. This is an organization having functional responsibility for a specific incident, planning, logistics, or finance. Task force, which is my favorite name just because it sounds pretty violent. Task force, a group of resources with common communications and a leader that may be pre-established and sent to an incident or formed as an incident. A strike team, which is a combination of resources within a common leader. And then a single resource, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a piece of equipment or a staff. Again, these are all just organizational terms you'll see underneath that big structure you just saw. So here's some major points to take away. And again, that was a lot of information, but more familiarity with the terminology is what we're looking for right now. ICS, again, is used by all emergency responders. So you will need to be familiar with the system in times of emergency. It provides common terms, symbols, and language you can use with outside agencies of all types. That's the nice thing, is that if you start talking to an outside group, so let's say an incident has happened, they set up an ICS structure in your location, and again, you can go up and talk to these people kind of in their language. You'll be able to go farther when you're looking for resources or anything within your facility. And then lastly, it can be scaled to your situation. And that's the important thing, is if we, next with the next slide, if you look at it, this is kind of an evidence of usability. This is taken from a great book. It's called The Implementing of Incident Command Systems at the Institutional Level. A handbook for libraries, archives, museums, and other cultural institutions. It's available online. It's written by David Carmichael. He was a state archivist for Georgia. And if you look, he basically took the ICS structure and he put it into play for something that was happening in his archives. He set up the incident command. The commander's up at the top. They have 3 command staff positions reporting to them, so he went ahead and set up those information officer, the safety officer, and the liaison officer, so he set up that little support group. Also reporting to the commander is an operations section chief, so he's continuing operations, who's broken this group into 4 teams. So recall that strike team level is a specified combination of the same kind and type of resources with common communications and a leader. The team was broken up into areas that the operation chief needs to respond to. So in this case, we have a vulnerable records team. So we have a group of people working towards your records. You have your personal evacuation team, the team to go and get everyone the heck out of the archives, which is undergoing an incident at the time. A network servers team, because we all need our computers. I think we all know that now. When the computers go down, you're kind of sunk for a little bit, it seems. And then you have a facilities team. So they're trying to get things back running. So this actually shows how ICS can be used at an archive pretty easily. I talked about training before. There's available online training offered by FEMA. It's free. Many classes are available, but 2 of your first you step into the world of ICS is a thing called IS 100. It's an introduction to ICS. It's a lot of the stuff I covered in this little talk, but it gets more deep into it and what it's talking about. So that's a good intro class. And then the other good one is called IS 700. It's called NIMS, Introduction. And NIMS stands for, I think it's something like National I actually can't remember what NIM stands for, but it's basically the terminology that all these groups use when it comes to going into disasters and handling disasters in their area. Some additional resources. Steve actually talked about these because he stole them from my prior PowerPoint. But there's a great website called Rescuing Records. It's actually set up by David Carmichael. It's great. It has all sorts of fun little tabletops you can pull off of it. This book, a couple other things. So it's a really useful website to know. And then the book I referred to as well, which is that Implementing the Incident Command Systems at the Institutional Level. That book really made me understand that ICS could be used at what we do. And it's not just this giant, crazy org chart looking thing. It's kind of scaled down to our institutions.